In the mid-15th century, in the shadowed lands between the Kingdom of Hungary and the expanding Ottoman Empire, a ruler emerged whose name would travel across Europe wrapped in terror. Vlad III of Wallachia did not command the largest army nor the richest treasury, yet he cultivated something far more powerful: fear. Merchants whispered of roads lined with bodies. Envoys reported fields transformed into forests of impaled men, their silhouettes visible for miles. Enemies who marched toward his borders often found their courage fading long before battle began. He ruled from Targovist not merely as a prince, but as a warning. To his supporters, he was a defender of a fragile Christian frontier. To his enemies, he was Vlad Tepes, the Impaler, an embodiment of calculated cruelty. Chronicles written in German towns and Ottoman courts alike described punishments so brutal they seemed almost theatrical, designed less to kill than to terrify. Yet fear on such a scale is never accidental. It is constructed, sharpened, and sustained with intent. The question that haunted contemporaries was not only how he ruled with such severity, but why. Behind the reputation that froze armies and silenced dissent lay a darker truth still hidden from those who trembled at his name. Vlad's story did not begin with power, but with vulnerability. He was born in 1431 in the Transylvanian town of Sighisoara, into a world defined by shifting loyalties and fragile thrones. His father, Vlad II Drakel, had secured his position through membership in the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric brotherhood sworn to defend Christianity against Ottoman expansion. Yet titles offered little protection in a region caught between rival empires. Wallachia was a borderland principality, constantly pressured by Hungary to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south. Survival often depended on compromise, tribute, and uneasy alliances. In 1442, when Vlad was still a boy, political necessity turned personal. His father was summoned by Sultan Murad II and compelled to leave his sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, as hostages at the Ottoman court in Edirne. The arrangement was common in medieval diplomacy, intended to guarantee loyalty. But for a child, it meant confinement under watchful guards in the heart of a foreign empire. There, Vlad was exposed to Ottoman military discipline, court ritual, and the ruthless logic of imperial politics. He witnessed power exercised without hesitation and understood what happened to those who defied it. The contrast between the brothers grew sharper with time. Radu adapted, learning the language and culture, eventually earning favor within the Ottoman court. Vlad, according to later accounts, remained defiant and withdrawn. Whether these descriptions were embellished or not, captivity undoubtedly marked him. News from home brought no comfort. In 1447, his father was overthrown and killed, and his elder brother Mircea was reportedly buried alive by rival boyars. Vlad, still effectively a pawn in Ottoman hands, learned that his family had been destroyed while he could do nothing. When he was eventually released, the world he returned to was harsher than the one he had left. The throne of Wallachia had changed hands repeatedly, and loyalty was a currency easily spent. For Vlad, power was no longer an inheritance, it was something to be seized and defended at all costs. The years in Edirne did more than educate him in politics and warfare, they taught him that weakness invited annihilation. Hostage chains may have bound his body, but they hardened his resolve. Whatever kind of ruler he would become, it would not be one who relied on mercy alone. When Vlad finally reclaimed the throne of Wallachia in 1456, he did so in a land where betrayal was routine and loyalty was fragile. The principality had endured years of instability, and the boyar nobles who dominated its politics had proven willing to shift allegiances whenever it suited them. They had played roles in the deaths of Vlad's father and brother, and they expected the young ruler to remain dependent on their support. Instead, he moved swiftly to dismantle their influence. His reign would not be negotiated, it would be imposed. One of the earliest and most infamous episodes came during the Easter season of 1457. According to later chronicles, Vlad invited leading boyars to a feast in Targovist. What began as ceremony ended in reckoning. Some nobles were executed immediately. Others were forced on a brutal march to the remote heights of Poenary, where they labored to rebuild a fortress perched on a cliff above the Argesh River. The message was unmistakable: the era of aristocratic manipulation was over. Authority would no longer be shared with those who had undermined the throne. Public punishment became central to Vlad's rule. Theft, corruption, and disloyalty were met with extreme consequences. Impalement, slow, visible, and horrifying, was not used randomly. It was spectacle. Bodies were left along roads and outside cities as warnings to travelers and rivals alike. Fear was cultivated deliberately, transforming Wallachia from a land of internal intrigue into one of rigid order. Merchants reported safer highways. Peasants found that crime diminished under the shadow of severe reprisal. Stability emerged, but it was stability maintained through dread. Vlad understood that he ruled a small state surrounded by larger powers. Internal unity was essential if Wallachia were to resist foreign domination. By crushing the boyars and centralizing authority, he removed competing centers of influence. His court became less a gathering of negotiators and more an extension of his will. In a region where rulers were often overthrown within years, Vlad's methods created a different kind of security, one rooted in the certainty of punishment. Yet such severity carried a cost. Fear can enforce obedience, but it also isolates. The nobles who survived served cautiously, not faithfully. Allies abroad began to question whether the prince's brutality was calculated strategy or something darker. Vlad had secured his throne through blood and terror. The question was whether the same methods that protected his power would ultimately endanger it. Vlad's authority within Wallachia was only part of the struggle. Beyond his borders stood the most formidable power of the age, the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Wallachia had long paid tribute to maintain a fragile peace, but Vlad understood that submission guaranteed neither security nor respect. In 1461, he made a decision that would define his reign. He refused to continue payment and began striking Ottoman positions south of the Danube. It was a calculated provocation, transforming a vassal principality into an open adversary. His campaign relied not on overwhelming force but on unpredictability. Vlad's troops launched sudden winter raids, crossing frozen rivers to attack garrisons and supply depots. Villages loyal to the Ottomans were burned, prisoners taken, and entire outposts erased before reinforcements could arrive. These were not large-scale conventional battles but targeted assaults designed to disrupt and intimidate. Vlad understood that Wallachia could not defeat the empire in a prolonged confrontation. Instead, he sought to make invasion costly and psychologically exhausting. In 1462, Mehmed II responded with a massive army, advancing into Wallachia determined to crush the rebellion. Vlad did not meet him with a traditional defensive line. Instead, he implemented scorched earth tactics, destroying crops and poisoning wells to deprive the Ottomans of supplies. As the imperial army pushed deeper into hostile territory, it encountered resistance that struck at night and vanished by dawn. The most audacious of these actions came during the night attack at Targovist in June 1462. Under cover of darkness, Vlad and a selected force infiltrated the Ottoman camp, attempting to reach the Sultan's tent and decapitate the command structure in a single blow. Though Mehmed survived, the raid spread confusion and demonstrated that no position was secure. When the Ottoman forces finally reached Targovist, they were confronted by a spectacle that would echo through chronicles: thousands of impaled prisoners lining the approach to the city. The sight was intended not merely as cruelty but as strategy. Fear was deployed as a weapon, aiming to sap morale and magnify uncertainty. Even Mehmed is said to have been shaken by the scale of the display. Yet terror could not substitute for numbers indefinitely. The Ottomans installed Vlad's brother Radu as a rival claimant, leveraging internal divisions against him. Vlad's campaign had proven his ingenuity and ferocity, but it had also escalated the conflict beyond his limited resources. The weapon of fear had reached its most dramatic expression, and its limits were beginning to show. As the war against the Ottomans intensified, Vlad's methods grew harsher, and the line between calculated deterrence and deepening paranoia became harder to distinguish. Within Wallachia, punishments extended beyond rebellious nobles and foreign enemies. Merchants accused of dishonesty, envoys perceived as disrespectful, even peasants suspected of minor crimes faced severe retribution. Chroniclers described impalements carried out for theft or disobedience, public executions staged not only to eliminate threats but to reinforce absolute obedience. Justice, in Vlad's court, was swift and uncompromising. Yet such severity hinted at a ruler who trusted no one fully. Years of betrayal had shaped him. His father murdered, his brother killed, his childhood spent as a hostage in a foreign court. These experiences had taught Vlad that loyalty was fragile and power temporary. The boyars who once manipulated thrones could rise again. The Ottomans could exploit any sign of weakness. Even alliances with Hungary were uncertain. Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, initially supported Vlad against Ottoman expansion, but political convenience soon altered that relationship. In 1462, after Vlad's position weakened and his brother Radu gained Ottoman backing, Matthias arrested Vlad instead of reinforcing him. Accusations, likely exaggerated or fabricated, were circulated to justify the imprisonment. For over a decade, Vlad remained in Hungarian custody. Whether he was confined strictly or granted limited freedom under supervision, his authority in Wallachia was effectively removed. During these years, his legend continued to grow, but he was no longer the architect of events. Isolation replaced command. The prince who had ruled through spectacle and terror now faced the vulnerability of captivity once more. If fear had once been his shield, it offered no protection here. The darker truth of his reign may lie in this pattern. Vlad did not merely use fear as policy, he lived within it. Suspicion surrounded him constantly, of nobles, of foreign courts, even of allies. His brutality may have secured order, but it also narrowed his circle of trust. Each execution removed a potential traitor, yet also deepened resentment. Each display of terror reinforced authority, yet amplified his reputation as unstable and dangerous. When he was eventually released and later restored briefly to the throne, he returned to a world transformed. But the years of confinement had altered him. The secret beneath his reign was not simply cruelty. It was a relentless belief that survival required absolute control, and that mercy was a risk he could not afford to take. While Vlad struggled for survival in the shifting politics of Eastern Europe, his reputation began to take on a life of its own beyond the battlefield. In the German-speaking cities of Central Europe, pamphlets appeared in the 1460s describing him as a sadistic tyrant who delighted in unimaginable cruelty. These accounts, among the earliest products of the newly developed printing press, spread rapidly. Woodcut illustrations depicted grotesque scenes of impalement, torture, and feasts among corpses. Whether exaggerated or not, the imagery was powerful. It transformed a regional prince into a figure of continental horror. The motives behind these publications were not purely moral outrage. Many of the German merchants who traded through Wallachia had clashed with Vlad over taxes and regulation. His strict control over commerce disrupted established privileges, and resentment followed. Political rivalries also played a role. By portraying Vlad as a barbaric despot, opponents could justify distancing themselves from him or supporting rival claimants. Propaganda became a weapon, shaping perception as effectively as any army. Ottoman chroniclers offered their own versions, emphasizing his brutality to underscore the righteousness of campaigns against him. Romanian sources, by contrast, sometimes presented him as a stern but necessary defender of order, a ruler who punished corruption and defended Christian lands from foreign domination. The divergence in accounts reveals how history can fracture depending on perspective. To some, he was a monster. To others, a patriot forged in a brutal era. The rise of print amplified these competing narratives. Stories that might once have remained local rumors now traveled across Europe, reaching readers who had never seen Wallachia on a map. Fear was no longer confined to battlefields or borderlands, it circulated in ink and paper. Vlad's image hardened into caricature, an embodiment of cruelty that outlived the political circumstances of his reign. Modern historians continue to debate the scale of his atrocities. There is little doubt that he used extreme punishment as policy. Yet the numbers and details reported in pamphlets often strain credibility, suggesting embellishment designed to shock. The truth likely lies between legend and denial. Vlad ruled in a violent century where brutality was not uncommon, but he elevated it into deliberate spectacle. In death, he became something larger than a historical prince. The machinery of propaganda ensured that his name would echo far beyond his lifetime, shaped not only by what he did, but by what others needed him to represent. When Vlad was finally released from Hungarian captivity in the 1470s, the political landscape of Eastern Europe had shifted once again. The Ottoman Empire continued to expand, Hungary faced mounting pressure, and Wallachia remained a contested frontier. For years, Vlad had existed more as a symbol than a ruler, his legend growing even as his direct power diminished. Yet opportunity returned in 1476, when shifting alliances allowed him to reclaim the Wallachian throne for a brief final time. It was not the triumphant restoration of an unchallenged prince, but the desperate return of a hardened survivor to a land still divided. His position was fragile from the outset. Rival claimants backed by Ottoman influence remained active, and loyalty within Wallachia was never absolute. The fear that had once enforced order could not erase years of instability. Vlad attempted to reassert control quickly, but he no longer commanded the same advantage of surprise or momentum. His enemies had learned from earlier confrontations. The Ottomans and their allies moved decisively to eliminate him before he could consolidate power again. The final campaign ended in violence and ambiguity. In late 1476, during clashes with Ottoman-supported forces near Bucharest, Vlad was killed. Accounts of his death vary, some suggest he fell in battle, others that he was assassinated by rival nobles. What is generally agreed upon is that his head was severed and sent to Sultan Mehmed II in Constantinople as proof of his demise. The display was both practical and symbolic. The ruler who had lined roads with impaled enemies was himself reduced to a trophy, a message that terror could be answered with equal severity. His death did not immediately stabilize Wallachia. The principality continued to oscillate between competing influences, its rulers navigating the same precarious balance Vlad had confronted decades earlier. Yet something had changed. Even in defeat, his reputation endured. Those who had feared him remembered the forests of stakes and the night raids. Those who admired him recalled his defiance against overwhelming odds. In the end, Vlad's power proved mortal, but his image did not. The man who ruled with fear met a violent end in a world that understood little else. His final chapter revealed the limits of terror as a foundation for lasting rule. Fear can command obedience and win battles, but it cannot guarantee permanence. The legacy he left behind would evolve far beyond the political struggles of 15th-century Wallachia. Death did not end Vlad's story, it transformed it. In the centuries that followed, his name drifted through folklore, ballads, and regional memory, reshaped by each generation that retold it. In Romania, he was often remembered as a harsh but just ruler who defended his land against foreign domination and punished corruption without hesitation. In Western Europe, the earlier pamphlets had already cemented a darker image, one of cruelty so extreme it bordered on the supernatural. By the time Bram Stoker published Dracula in 1897, fragments of Vlad's reputation merged with Gothic imagination, and the historical prince became inseparable from the vampire legend. Yet beneath myth and exaggeration lies a more complex truth. Vlad ruled in a brutal century where borders were fragile and mercy could invite overthrow. He weaponized fear not as random savagery, but as calculated policy in a land surrounded by stronger powers. His dark secret was not simply cruelty, it was the belief that survival demanded absolute control. Whether seen as monster, patriot, or tragic figure shaped by trauma, his legacy endures as a reminder that power sustained by terror leaves a shadow long after the throne is empty.